Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, February 12th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 490 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate those of you tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms where this show can be found. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit more about the New York Jets coaching staff as the New York Jets officially announced their full coaching staff yesterday. So we will break it down, take a look at some of the new names that were added, and really kind of see where this team's at here from a coaching staff perspective, and if any other moves could still come for this New York Jets coaching staff, along with front office as well. As always, before we begin, we got to get into our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. Click my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. If you want to get in on any of the Four Nations face-off action, which starts tonight, NBA, college basketball, March right around the corner. Check it out and use my link, as I mentioned, and get on over to BetUS. Also, our partner over at SeatGeek. If you're looking for any tickets to the best in sports or entertainment, use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. If you can buy a ticket for an event, SeatGeek has it. Bubs on Sports, $20 off first time using SeatGeek. And of course, our friends over at Huga House. You see the hat I'm wearing right now. If you want this hat or any of their other wide range selection of hats, including some new arrivals, along with new arrival sweatshirts that are going very fast, check out Huga House. Use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase. And on that promo code, you'll get 15% off your first hat and then 30% off your second hat. So check them out and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go. Episode 490 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. Let's get right into it here. So yesterday afternoon, the New York Jets officially announced their full coaching staff. Obviously, over the last couple weeks since Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji were brought in, we've seen a complete real overhaul here from a coaching staff perspective. Aaron Glenn bringing in his guys, a few guys that are being kept from the previous regime, but mostly an entirely new staff. And then from a front office perspective, Darren Muji as well, making some major changes, which is much needed to a front office that has had guys inside that building for 8 to 16 years in scouting roles that haven't done a whole lot and obviously haven't produced any winning. So a lot to break down. We'll throw this up first. We'll start with the offense, then we'll go to the defensive staff. We'll throw up the offense here on first. Obviously, Scott Turner is a senior assistant pass game coordinator. We've talked about him. Jeff Blasco, tight ends. Steve Heaton is an offensive line coach. Sean Jefferson, wide receivers. Charles London, quarterbacks. Junior Taylor, offensive assistant. Walter Kuzmarek is the offensive assistant. Brian Nacken is a assistant offensive line coach. And Nick McKissick, Luke, who we've also discussed previously, is a running backs coach. So 9 names under Tanner Engstrand, the offensive coordinator. So including Engstrand, 10 coaches there on the offensive staff. I've said this a lot about the offense. I was hoping to see somebody come in here with a proven track record and experience. The Jets did not do that. Aaron Glenn did not do that here with this hiring or with this coaching staff. Offensively. Defensively, there's a lot of it. We'll get to it. I really like the defensive staff Offensively, I like Scott Turner a lot, but there's a lot of unknowns, right? Charles London's a guy that's got a heavy running back background that is now a quarterback's coach, has only been a quarterback's coach for 4 seasons. Nick McKissick, Luke, has had some success in college, but first time getting a prominent role, a positional role in the NFL. Sean Jefferson's got a lot of experience. He's been around Jefferson to a guy that's got a strong relationship with Garrett Wilson, so he's fine. Steve Heaton, though, been a tight ends coach his entire career, now transitions into a first-time offensive lines coach. Now he was working in Detroit with Hank Fraley, who was one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. And you look at the Lions, and oftentimes tight ends and blocking and offensive line are tightly kind of pretty much together. So hopefully he could take some of that and carry it here. But there are a lot of unknowns. I would have still liked to see an Anthony Lynn come in as an assistant or even an assistant head coach. I would have liked to see a Todd Haley, somebody like that. Now, it's not completely out of the equation that another one of these that they can bring in more experience, right? And I really like Scott Turner again as the pass game coordinator. What I really like about Scott Turner is he's called plays before in a couple different spots with Washington, was with Vegas last year. So has that experience and hopefully can kind of help Engstrand and be a little bit of that, that knowledge and that leadership on this staff with a lot of other inexperienced guys in other places, whether that be the OC, who's a first-time play caller at the NFL level, and Tanner Engstrand, or whether that be some of these positional coaches. I would still like to see another experienced guy, even just come in as an advisor. And I bring up the name, somebody like a Norv Turner, who is actually the father of Scott Turner. Obviously, Norv Turner is been around forever. Has been a head coach in multiple different spots, has been an offensive coordinator in many different areas. And this is a guy who last season got back into the NFL as an advisor for the Raiders. I would totally be on board if this team wanted to bring in Norv Turner as an advisor, not necessarily a guy that's on there, on the sidelines week 1 as a positional coach wearing a headset, but as a guy that can just oversee things and step in and help when it's needed. So we'll see if that happens. But as of now, the 9 assistants to Tanner Engstrand plus Engstrand, the 10 coaches on this staff, you've got Scott Turner, and there is certainly a little bit of an experience. But I think it's ultimately on this offensive staff, I think you're looking at a staff that's got a high ceiling and probably a floor that is probably lower, maybe a lower floor, higher ceiling, where the low floor is it's inexperienced. It's a first-time NFL offensive coordinator, Tanner Engstrand, right? We'll see kind of what this offense looks like this year, who's the quarterback next season. The biggest thing that's going to come down to the staff is when they develop that quarterback, when they draft and find their quarterback, whether that's this year, whether that's 2026, whenever that is, can they develop that guy into a franchise QB? That'll be the biggest test of them all. So we'll see. I think Engstrand's got some good traits, right? We've talked about him, what he brings coming over from a Lions offense that has seen a big turnaround. I think there's certainly things to be excited about in other areas, or at least be hopeful about in other areas. But it's a lot of unknowns. Now, the opposite of that is the defensive and special teams staffs here. So we throw this up on the screen. Chris Harris is the DB's coach, defensive pass game coordinator. Dre Bly will be the assistant defensive backs coach. Aaron Curley, the linebackers. Cameron Davis, assistant D-line. Eric Washington, defensive line. Nathaniel Willingham, assistant linebackers. Alonzo Escalante, defensive assistant / nickels. Roosevelt Williams will be defensive assistant. Kevin O'Day will be the special teams assistant, and John Berger will be the game management coach here. Obviously, the 2 coordinators, Steve Wilkes, and then you'll have Chris Banjo, special teams coordinator. I really like the defensive and special team staff, and I also really like adding that game management coordinator in John Berger, who's been around for a very long time, spent a ton of time with the Giants, previously has now worked in the NFL front office, or has been in the NFL the last couple of years, was with the Giants from 1987 to 2021 in a variety of different analytical roles, has worked with the NFL since including being the vice president of their replay operation. I've talked about this a lot. The Jets needing to improve from a game management perspective. Under Robert Saleh, their clock management, their in-game decision-making was pathetic. It killed them in so many games. That carried over with Jeff Ulbrich, who was completely clueless. The Jets need John Berger and also Aaron Glenn as well. Berger will be in his ear, but Glenn's got to make the final decision. They need to be a lot stronger. So hopefully a guy with decades of experience going all the way back to the 80s can help the Jets in that role, which I really like. I also really like Steve Wilks. We've talked about that a lot. I also really like Eric Washington. This is a defensive line that got significantly worse last year and needs to be built back up. It only got worse because Joe Douglas made some terrible, terrible decisions. We know what those decisions are. We don't need to completely rehash them and go back down that road. We know what took place. Eric Washington's guy that's going to have to come in, rebuild that D-line a little bit, and get that defensive line playing like it was 2023, 2022, where they were one of the best units and scariest units in the NFL. And I have a lot of belief in Eric Washington to do that. He's been a defensive coordinator before. He's been a defensive line coach in many different stops as well. So tons of experience. Really like him. I also kind of like the whole theme here with Glenn, where there's a lot of former players on this staff. Aaron Curry, Chris Harris, Dre Bly, throw in Chris Banjo as well on the special teams. A lot of former players, Glenn himself being a former player. And I think there is something to say for that, where these guys have been there, done that. They've been through it. And I do think, and not every time, not all times do former players make great coaches, right? Make great positional coaches. That's not a guarantee. We've seen both. We've seen former players make good coaches. We've seen former players flop, right? It all kind of depends on ultimately how you are as a coach. You could be the greatest player in the world and stink at coaching. But there is something to be said about being a former player, being in a player's shoes before, playing at a high level, right? Having success, and modern players, current players, that locker room, buying in, believing a little bit more because you've walked in those guys' shoes. You understand what it's like. You understand what they're going through. You understand what you want to hear and need to hear as a player. And players, I think, respect that because they know you've got experience and you understand where they're coming from. Both sides kind of understand. So I do like that aspect, especially on defensive staff here, where you've got a ton of former players and you've got really good experience. And Steve Wilks was a head coach at one point, right? Actually, 2 spots, intern with Carolina, 1 year in Arizona, been a defensive coordinator many different times, tons of experience. Eric Washington, tons of experience for that role. Chris Banjo's a first-time guy, but I think the Jets needed a fresh new voice on special teams. I do. Right? The special teams last season was a massive. We talk a lot about the defense dropping off a lot. Special teams drop off was right there with the defense. That needs to be a lot better. Banjo coming over was under Mike Westhoff's staff in Denver. Comes over from one of the better special teams coaches all time. So obviously that's a pretty ringing endorsement as well. So you've got some belief in Banjo as well. So that's the coaching staff. Again, I'd still like to see some sort of advisor, veteran, experienced guy for offense. Glenn got his experience on defense, I think, perfect. I think he's got a good mix on defense. Offense, like Scott Turner a lot as the experience, maybe could use a little bit more. We'll see if that happens. Probably not. But that's the staff announced it yesterday. And we'll see if anything else happens, if they hire any advisors, how that all ends up playing out. But most likely this is what it is. The Jets also, of course, made it official, the hiring of Rick Spielman, and they also hired Robbie Patton up in the football front office, of course, personnel department. So 2 key additions there. Really like Spielman. We've talked about it when the news broke on the podcast where, he was leaving, CBS Sports and the podcast that he was doing to join the Jets. Really like Spielman a lot. experience, been a GM before, has had success as a GM in Minnesota, can kind of come in and be that what Chris Spielman, his brother, is doing in Detroit, that shield between the owner and Muji and Glenn, and kind of be that shield between Woody and those guys, and help them out, help them through the process, mentor, lead them, similar to what Spielman did, where he kind of oversees things. And it's just important, not only just the Spielman hire itself, though I really like, I also just really like that they're making changes. Like the Jets aren't keeping the same guys in the front office that have done absolutely nothing in the last 10. I mean, there's guys that have been scouting for 10 to 15 years. Like, you've got to move on from those guys. You've got to start fresh, and that's what the Jets are doing. And I really like that. So there it is. Jets announced coaching staff, make it official, the front office additions as well. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Do you like the coaching staff? Would you still like to see another addition as an advisor or something like that? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. We'll have a lot more content coming your way. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.